on the floor, it's a sign of disrespect. So there's this this luscious O in the middle of that word that's removed, this center. So I was interested in that. And the first poem I'm going to read, I was thinking about linguistic absence. And I should also say that I went to a Jewish school for my whole childhood. So this first poem I'm going to read also came out of that experience. And it's called God G-D, a portrait. God, a portrait. First, we were taught how to spell his name. Then we were told to draw him. It was an exercise in metaphor. The balls of paper amassed before me, while my classmates drew stars, maps of the Holy Land. I thought I should color everything I could think of. Human hands, the golden breakfast yolk, thick-skinned tree, knowing somewhere it was all correct. Writing G-O-D in the corner of the page, discarding it, and still everything remained the same. Then the desecrated flower drawn out in parts. Stem, petal, stamen, pollen, even a bee to operate. Because between the third and the seventh, it all happened so suddenly. Where God was impatient, I took my time. Outside, new plants went on growing as we sat in our huddles trying to draw something. And the next poem sort of continues with this idea of language and absence, at least to me. It's called Mangifera Indica, which is Latin for mango. Mangifera Indica. If he hadn't been an illegal immigrant, my uncle, a great brown bulb, might have flourished, emerged, untangled himself, instead of rising only when called, climbing the old stairs to his mother, my grandmother, in the kitchen, weaving my hair. Or if success had little to do with absence, my dad, small among his boxes, might have left the backyard sorting merchandise and descended to the basement with a loving cup of tea, each brother confessing, yes, it's been a long day. Or when the moon was whole, the brothers might have met on the patio to reminisce about their backyard mango tree in Delhi, the one they each told me about, but never at the same time. So I had to braid their stories, grow my own epic mango tree. I imagined the way my grandmother used her hands to peel the flesh from the meat so the boys could plant the pit. If my father called down, my uncle called up, we could have, all of us, gathered in the living room and spoke. The three of them could have taught Mom and me Hindi words, beginning with the most essential, hello and nice to see you. The next poem is called Heritage Day, and I mentioned that I went to a Jewish day school for most of my childhood, and we had a Heritage Day that just so happened to coincide with around this time around Halloween. And I'll also mention that Sikh, the religion, is spelled S-I-K-H. So this poem is Heritage Day. Season of make-believe, I attune myself to forms I see in the movies. All month, teenagers break into different skins. Witches depart toward night. I've watched the trees behind the garage, the yellowing leaves so thin they appear cut of willow glass, neither here nor there. I make predictions. In 2 days, the leaves will redden, In a week, they'll fall, depart. At the mall, my friends and I don't discuss Heritage Day. Instead, spend hours among aisles of wigs, manufactured blood and fog. Horror or cute, they ask. Later, the choice to go Jewish or Indian. Sikh, my mom corrects. That word gone dormant, absent because my father was. Seek, like how I used to write it in my journal, as if to claim it, as if I would seek and ultimately find. I descend into the basement to the clothes kept in the clear bag, the Technicolor womb buried beneath holiday decorations. In the light of the living room, I don't feel right in the sari, heritage as mercurial as my reflection. Sikh or Jewish, or the one I most admire, Ghost, with its simple palette, unadorned body. A lot of these poems I would also consider coming of age poems. I sort of mentioned in the beginning that sort of my aim with this project was to talk about the divine in all different forms. So the speaker in this chapbook looks for the divine and outside of organized religion, and I think finds it in nature and sexuality and her own body. So I think this poem speaks to that. This also mentions Miriam, who's a figure from a biblical figure, and she's known for different things, but one of the things she's associated with is having a timbrel and singing and dancing with other women. This poem is called Natural Law. She calls touching herself heart drum. It's the Sabbath, and we're sick of talking about God, lighting candles, saying prayers over wine we're too young to taste. She sings out an ecstatic da-dum, da-dum. We light incense, pretend it's a cigarette, dare one another to kiss the mirror. Have you ever touched yourself? We dip our hands into the candy bowl, toss the sweets at her. Someone else finds a drum, beats it. The basement TV emits secular light, illuminates our forms. In the movie, the boy reaches for the white folds of a girl's thigh and doesn't stop. There is an opening in us, too. My friends fill the mouths of their sleeping bags. Then I find a plastic tambourine, shake it. You're like Miriam, they cry. Ash from the cigarette burning my hand. Even here in this low cellar, we cannot separate God or this prophet woman from our pleasure. This next poem is another sort of childhood poem and tries to sort of echo some of the circular imagery of that missing O in God. This is called Creation Myth. Creation Myth. It had always been there, a cell curling away from the vein of my street, portal of curve and meander, trees bowing into each other, a cul-de-sac. Riding my green bicycle, I circle, orchestrate plans involving a future cul-de-sac civilization where each house would house my friends, and in the evenings we'd meet for incandescent bonfires, roast wild robin meat on the flame, cast offerings to the sky. Yes, one day I'd live in a cul-de-sac, be a huntress and forager. Men are not yet part of my grand scheme. Feather and hair, I'd free all the domestic dogs to play in the center island of grass while I looked down from the rooftop, yipping. In heat, I ride faster to the opening that leads back to the street, dream up an enclosure of trees, because a circle encircles, and that's what makes it so pleasing. I'm going to read two more poems. This poem is for my mom, and it's called What My Mother Knows. What My Mother Knows. I tell you I want to eat a leaf for dinner. What unplanned response Buddhists might call mushin or no thought. It's summer and our small yard is swollen, giving. The low-hanging elm leaves refract edens of light. My new swing is a lifeline to the sky. Dipping my head back up, the returning blood spins everything godly. Thanks to you, before me, the large palmed leaf glistens on a white plate. My small bite is bitter, but there is joy. Where the household gods say, forbidden, you say, eat. I'm going to read one more poem and take this moment to thank everybody for coming. This is a really great turnout. It's like really weird to have this melding of worlds, but it's really, really great. So thank you for coming to support Peregrine and Tyler and me and poetry. And if you're in the Zoom, you probably know my name is Brooke, but some people spell my name without the E. So this poem touches on that while also trying to come back again to that first poem I read of this missing letter in a word. So this poem is called, If You Took Out the E, You Could Be Like the Stream. If you took out the E, you could be like the stream, the woman behind the counter says. And for a moment, a new way of being. I could be the grand stream, and every bright nutrient would bloat my cells. So when people drank, they too would grow golden. I'd be sure to flow at just the right speed. So when visitors came to rest along my shore, they'd be reminded gently of keeping a steady pace. It might be one of those subtle but ultimately significant changes. The way a river rock rearranged forms new braids of water, and this discourse affects the flow of the communal body. Truth is, I hate the way my name looks on the page with the E, without the E. Like part of me is missing, masculine, so far from water. Outside, Erie exhales large frothed breaths to the shore as the sky goes mauve to purple to black. God is God is God. I don't want a God who cares about the spelling of his name. I want to call it storm cloud, unforeseeable potential to come down or not, to wet us until we seek cover, silken or go on walking. Thank you.
That's marvelous. That final poem was wonderful. They were all wonderful, Brooke. Thank you. Okay, can everyone hear me? Okay, I'm still letting in people. Well, our next reader is going to be, guess who? Tyler Julian. So I'm going to say very little about him. If anyone's who's come on is not yet muted, please mute yourself. And then after Tyler reads, we can all ask questions about or give comments about both of them.
Tyler's gonna read.
Someone who just came in needs to mute. Okay, Julian's debut. I've got to fly on this. Collection of poetry takes you up and down, as we all know, those wonderful Wyoming highways, back and forth across a state obsessed with legacy and the reality that within its borders, everyone dies younger. Wow. Across these linked poems, Julian introduces you to a story wrestling with questions of both past and present, a family trying to survive, and a speaker seeking to define what it means to be an individual in the least populated state in the rapidly changing American West. And there are plenty more I could say, but I think I will, things are coming in and blocking me. Just a minute, let me let two more people in before I finish up here.
This is just the lady introducing them both.
Yeah, it's just the introducer. And I was going to talk about.
No, she did.
I am not Tyler
Mute
Julian.
yourself, mute yourself.
Yeah, mute yourselves. And I am trying to get the people in the waiting room in, but my computer is not letting me. So let me go back here for a minute and let them in before they go away. This is very, very frustrating.
Just come together as a community for writing. Thank you, Brooke, for sharing your words. You're a tough act to follow, and I mean that. I really love your work, and it's fun to be reading with you, and I'm so glad to share this space with you, with all of you who are tuning in. So thank you, everybody.
I didn't mute myself.
So, oh, you're back, Susan. Okay.
I'm back. This is a very frustrating, but I'm back and you guys didn't go away.
We did not. I was just thanking you. So you came right in time.
Perfect.
So I think I'll just jump in then. My book, Wyoming, The Next Question to Ask, to Answer, came out in 2019, and I've been reading from it for a little while now. And so I was talking with a class today, a creative writing class I was invited to talk with, and we talked whether or not authors share the same story over and over and over again, just with different names. And so I do want to start this reading with a couple new poems, just to kind of set the stage, and then I'll jump into the book just for a couple more minutes. But I wanted to share these new poems because they explore kind of the same place and the same people, and will lead us in nicely, hopefully, to Wyoming. These poems were just recently published in an amazing little magazine that Brooke was also published in, called Eco Theo. And so without further ado, this is Fence. Fence. And the fence needs built, and I, of course, say yes to the secret language of wire, of keep out, of property, and respect the landowner, then the land. So I drive the backhoe, the hydraulic breath, spider-like, blows smoke through the brush, and a bird is hit by the blade I push. A bird, the bird, an eagle, young, ugly, fearsome, bald, but truly defeathered and bleeding, and peep, 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 the unnerving blood. It squawks in my hand, I remember the words. A fossil we can leave, but something of life lived before, bury and destroy. I left smashed stones sharpened. Interested in the environment and theology, and I thought these poems would be appropriate to share with Brooke's poems that are so interested in the spiritual. And like I said, I think they do set the stage for a place and the people in it. And they're part of a new chapbook I'm working on that takes some of the themes in this and explores them maybe in a more concentrated way. So I'll share one more and then dive into Wyoming proper. Transubstantiation of bone to oil to plastic leaves a Gatorade bottle on the roadside beside an empty can of Bud Light, disintegrating. From last year, it will return to soil, potentially enrich the zone above shale that can be changed to oil. But move on, because the bottle in the rear view is now too small, but closer than it appears. The first things shall pass away too, in the incandescence of headlights, artificial light blotting out planet and star above, and wind draining the empty chill of time. Where are you going, since there's little to do but wait? And that's what I mean when I say this is the end. Time to move on. We can no longer see the stars. So those are from that new work, and they are a little bit heavy, but I think this book is a little bit heavy. It comes from a very specific time and place in my life where I was wrestling with questions of staying or going and wondering about my future and what kind of legacy I could leave, just like Susan introduced. And so that's kind of the world I like to work in. I like to research and write about. And so I think I better just dive right into it. So this is Wyoming. Oh, and before I go, I guess, sorry, these are linked poems. This collection of poetry, they're all linked. And so each page kind of bleeds into the next. And so I will be jumping around the book, and you'll hear kind of more of a conversational voice once in a while that weaves the story in and out of maybe more formal poems. And so I won't be stopping in between individual poems, and we should be wrapping this up in just a couple minutes. So thank you for coming again, and this is Wyoming. Have you seen the pines turn blue as the light changes to night, wondering if pine or spruce or fir smell of vanilla? Or the flowers wilt in the artificial light, forcing the stars to burn a little brighter, just for you? Like cyclical nature framed them for you, to spin under, fall under, just for you. I hope we're born again as highways, as prayer cards, as beer, as memory, as all the things that connect me to you, just you. The only place where waters flow east and west and a continent is divided, home. Fall is coming. Do you know who lost 11 yearlings? Do you know who broke the rake? Do you know who is sleeping alone? Blowing quickly down the plains, no windbreak, no deadfall, nothing but the cold gossip. Fall is coming. And so you run to the door to turn a key, and remembrance clouds reality. Tears as you exit and drive down and around a total mess of a car rolled on the side of the interstate, frozen in time. And we can't not look. An insurmountable desire for change, indirection, scars the landscape of dry riverbeds and small streams fed by springs of water that never freeze, sanguinary and alive. And the smallest drops of rain from a sudden, emotional, torrential cloudburst absorb with immediacy into the red clay cracked by summer. Your wet shoes carry you forward, perplexed, shocked, unwilling to remember, so you just turn the key. Do you remember the snow in June? Do you remember her with those prime times? Do you remember anything? Blowing through the brown grass, no windbreak, no deadfall, nothing but the cold gossip. Fall is coming. A natural decision, drive for purpose, unfolds as the instant ditch created by a flash flood of sentimentality. A choice of east or west, and freedom? Or is that the past? Do you know? Do you remember? Fall is coming. Reality of choice implies the ferocious weather of life, in season and out, in the least populated state. And still I wonder, after short summertime, after the fall, does spring always follow winter? So the next question to ask, to answer, to be forgot: do you take the interstate? The pattern cyclical, there and back, seems off today. Do you remember the smell of vanilla, the flowers, wild sunflowers, the gossip, the highways, the memory? The only place where waters flow east and west and a continent is divided. Home. So you drive there or back for purpose, any purpose, but you'll forget as remembrance clouds reality. Indirection frames this drive, called to attention by the dead, saints and sinners. Shit, this is getting sentimental. Do you remember? Do you know? Do you get it? Isolation. But that's life in the least populated state. So it's really no great deal. And naturally, you'll forget no matter how many times you ask. There is a fear in the isolation of a state where all know all but hardly see one another, that you will be forgotten, a shit legacy. Maybe that's why I don't like death. I ignore it when I can. Normally I say like the conversation tonight, but I like Brooke's poems. We see more than we understand, but they especially don't understand. The loss of memory, that childish talk that is used to address the old men because we don't know how to talk to them anymore. Naturally, that changes how you think of legacy. I imagine that's why we all die younger here, and I imagine that's why so many old men sit at the bar every day running from something or to something, but I'm getting too poetic here, and it'll eventually sound romantic. Still, that very real inability to grasp at choice makes me naturally appeal to the sentimental. The next question to ask, to answer, to be forgot: blank. That very real inability to grasp at choice or chance or risk. I keep coming back to that. I want you to understand where the others don't get it. But there's no judgment there if you don't get it. I just want you to get it. It's just that idea that you're going somewhere and the others aren't going somewhere. Risk. To risk to be lost. Isolation. 1. We have all been the Moor. We have all been the traitor. We have all been the outsider. We have all been the body looking through the windows, but separated. 2. Exclusion is no great deal, but intensity profound. We are the new protagonist, the hero aware of his weakness, autobiography. 3 movements in the creation of a seminal work: morning, midday, dusk. As the birds fly, unified breathing begets motion, begets change as the birds fly. 3. Amid briar and flame and the scar, deep and layered, but temporary. Exclusion. Kinetic mass blown by wind as ash, rattling the windows, looking within where we don't belong. 4. Amid the ashes grow roses, grow sunflowers, or something near. Fences need fixed to keep strays out, to carve out fierce individualism in a spot where it's all too easy to be swallowed up. So there is a solidarity in the isolation of the state, and you either get it or you don't. Don't get left behind. It's cyclical time, and it doesn't wait for us. Again, that's legacy. And I wonder if that's what Mother Nature does with dusk, offering one last shot when the grass is greener to make you say, today was an all right day. Thank you.
Very nice. Everybody can unmute now and give their comments, ask questions. You're pretty chatty at first, so let's hear what you have to say. I think both of you did splendid job. Wonderful reading from both of you. Very different feelings in the poems. That's splendid. I'm so glad. It's great pairing. So you're very different, but you somehow managed to enhance each other. So what other comments we have? Questions? I'm wondering if people are having trouble with the muting, getting it off. Someone just came in too. Okay. I can ask you to unmute. Come on, somebody must have something to say. I'm trying to.
Tyler would be the one who would be asking the question, but because he is the one receiving it.
Yeah, yeah.
I can
He was
come
the
up
one
with
in
one
class.
for Brooke.
Yeah. Tyler's the one in class who like would ask the question, right? When like people weren't asking, so.
I don't do well with silence.
That's unusual for a poet.
I do have a question for Brooke. I think I recently got to interview her for The Shore, which is a great little online magazine. One of the editors is in attendance, I know. And actually, a couple of them are in attendance. I forgot Emma was in here too. But I asked Brooke a good question because her poems feel so autobiographical almost. I was wondering if she could talk to maybe her inspiration a little bit with these poems. I know she did a little bit at the beginning, but she had a really great answer in that interview, and I was wondering if she could share some of that tonight. But this idea of like writing from memory.
What did I say?
Well, that's something I'm really interested in as well in my own work. But I think I asked, like, are all these poems based off real events in your life?
Thanks, Tyler, for asking a question. I feel like I probably said something better in writing and now it won't be as eloquent. Yeah, I mean, I would say pretty much all of these poems are rooted in, I mean, they're narrative. They're rooted in some way in personal experience, but I'm not really interested in my own experience, to be honest. I think that for me, personal experience is the weight that grounds a poem and keeps it from becoming too abstract. And really, I'm most interested in the idea. So I'm less interested in telling a story about my life. I'm just using something from my life to get at a larger idea. So like in the first poem I read, God, a Portrait, I was thinking about like, how do I write a poem that, you know, says, doesn't matter what we call God. What else was I thinking about? That it's ridiculous to try to have children try to draw this big ineffable thing. So I was thinking about language and more theory and philosophy, I would say, and just used that experience that did happen when I was, I don't know, like kindergarten or first grade, as a means to get specific with an idea. And I write fiction too, so I like narrative.
Yeah.
That's a good question, Tyler.
And that's a good answer too, Brooke. Tyler, I wanted to know about your, you have the collection from Wyoming, the highways, the roaming Wyoming, but then you'd read a little bit different poems in the beginning. When you're writing the different poems, do you feel a greater sense of freedom to explore?
That's a good question. Thank you, Susan. I think that this book, Wyoming, like I said, came out of a very specific time and place in my life, where I knew that I wanted to write. I was trying to figure out if there was maybe a more professional route for me to take into that world. I didn't know if I was going to get into New Mexico State University's MFA program, for example. I was trying to figure out where I would be spending my life if I wasn't able to go to that program. Did that mean spending more time at the family ranch? Did that mean trying to find a job in Cheyenne, Wyoming, where I had some connections, things like that? And at the same time too, my grandfather was suffering through Alzheimer's. And so it was a very strange time in my life where I was very interested in memory. I was very interested in this idea of who gets remembered and why, who stays and why. That's a recurring line in my poem, who stays here and why, or in my collection. And so it, as a collection, it's very tied to that point in my life, and I feel very proud of it. I think my writing has changed since I wrote that. That I finished this collection before I entered the MFA program, and so my writing has grown and changed. I don't think I would go back and change this book because, like I said, it represents a specific moment in my life, and it represents the best I could do at that point in time. And I'm still very proud of it. But those poems I read today, or at the beginning, are different thematically, even if they're similar in location and maybe with kind of the people in it. And that has been a really fun project for me. And a couple of the other projects I'm working on have been fun because though they're rooted in the same place, rooted in similar ideas, I'm having to maybe dive into some of my other interests. They're getting a little maybe less personal, and I'm able to do research. In that chapbook I've been working on that those poems came from, I have several poems that are about John Coulter, the trapper. And so I've been doing research into John Coulter and who he is and what his experience in the West was like. And so that has been a lot of fun for me. I don't know if it's necessarily more freeing. It might be less emotional, but it's definitely more research and maybe more fun because of that, actually. But because Wyoming, the book, was very cathartic for me. As some of my teachers at New Mexico State would say, that was a long walk for a short drink of water. So I hope I answered it.
Yeah, that was really interesting. But I felt the difference, and it's just wonderful. And that was a great question you asked, Brooke. Does anyone else have any questions or comments?
So I guess something that I pulled from both Brooke and Tyler is this concept of choice. What choices do we have? Should we make a choice or not? And so I guess this question goes to both Tyler and Brooke. How do you embody choice further in your work? Because we have this constant tension in Wyoming of choice, and then going back to Brooke's poem about drawing God, right? This infinite being. So I guess what power does choice play in your work or furthering your creation?
Go ahead, one of you start
Great
and the other
question.
one.
Tyler, go ahead.
You go
That's
ahead.
not right.
Looking at, I want to talk about Brooke's work for a second. I think like Brooke said, so much of her work is very interested in kind of coming of age stories, right? And that self-discovery. I think that Wyoming, my book, is very similar in that respect, that the speaker is going on a journey. He ends up in the same spot at the end, not to give away the ending, but he ends up in the same spot as he was kind of at the beginning. The lines from the beginning of the book start repeating at the end. And I think that he, I tried to create something that was a little more narrative. That's why I wanted these poems to be linked. That's why there's maybe more of a conversational voice in this book. And so for me, that idea of choice in Wyoming specifically was about a choice of who do I want to be and where do I want to be and what that looks like in a spot in an environment that's maybe a little brutal, right? Weather throughout my book is a pressing factor. Fall is coming. I have a lot of poems about snow and about storms in it. And so this idea that the speaker has to find their place in the world and that is reliant on choices they make and where that leads them to is something I was trying to explore as it related to that idea of memory and legacy in particular. And so I don't know if my book matches the same kind of idea of creation that Brooks is exploring, but it's definitely a journey of self-discovery. And I feel okay where the speaker ended up in it. I mean, a lot of this book was fairly autobiographical, so I better be at least on, as Joan Didion would say, nodding terms with my former self, right? So being on nodding terms with the speaker of this book.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. That word choice, to be honest, isn't something that word isn't something that I've consciously thought about. But now that you've brought it up in this idea, because a lot of my poetry manuscript and a lot of my fiction it is that coming of age, right? Which that is typically some kind of cyclical, or there's some sort of completion or some kind of, I mean, with any narrative, there's sort of some kind of epiphany or something. And so of course, I mean, this question is making me think more about fiction, just because I think we're typically sort of trained in thinking about that narrative arc and what choices does a protagonist make to lead to that epiphany. And I'm also thinking about, I don't know if Jill is still in here, but I remember my friend Jill, who was in my MFA cohort, saying that my poetry for this project in divining and a longer manuscript was more concerned with questions rather than answers. So I think your question's really interesting, because choice, to me, when I hear that word, it implies a conclusion or something that maybe is neat, like a choice has been made, although it can also be interpreted in different ways. But I think that in both my poetry and my fiction, I am more interested in, the characters or the speaker in my poems questioning, and that choice is something that's never really made, is how I'm thinking of choice. Yeah. In terms of just a character making a choice, or there being something that's conclusive. So, and I don't think that's how you intended the question, but that's how I'm sort of thinking of choice as something that's more final, which it doesn't have to be, but that's kind of how I'm interpreting it.
Thank you. That's good questions, and your answers went in different aspects of the question. So that was lovely. Does anyone else?
I have a question. So this is mostly aimed towards Tyler, but Brooke, feel free to jump in. So I know I live in Detroit now, but I'm a Wyomingite through and through. I get, but not triggered, but like every time I hear Wyoming, I'm like, Wyoming! It's so ingrained in me. But Tyler, you had mentioned, and I'm familiar with the time you were going through, but you said it meant to you something then. Now that your writing style has grown and you've changed, and Brooke, I'm sure this is the same with you. How do you feel now reflecting back? Do you think the meaning has changed at all?
I don't know. I think a question. Sorry, thank you, Hannah, for that question. It's a good question. I think that this is a conversation that comes up sometimes in like workshop spaces where people are working on their writing, and you get this question of like, should you publish before you're like good? Should you publish before you're done with a program, before like you're through the class, things like that. And I always thought that was a strange question. I think that writing is really rooted to specific moments, and the best writing can transcend those moments. But I mean, if I don't know, looking at like Lauren Groff's first novel compared to her most recent short story collection, like the difference is pretty staggering.
Mhm.
But I loved her first book, and I recognized it as a first book. And so I think that writers shouldn't be afraid to put stuff out there, especially maybe before they've jumped through the hoops to get to being good, or whatever that means. And so I think too, Wyoming, I did try, one of my intentional thoughts with the book Wyoming was, will somebody who's not from Wyoming understand this? Will somebody who has no understanding of ranching or no understanding of what it's like to drive on the interstate in a snowstorm understand what that image means? And so that was a question I had as I was revising. And so I do hope that there is something in this book that transcends that moment in which I wrote it. For me personally, I did a bunch of readings when it first came out, but then things kind of dried up for a while. And so reading it so intensely and then taking a break from it and then coming back was actually really rewarding, I thought. And I really enjoyed seeing those moments and thinking, oh yeah, I remember making that choice, or I remember writing that line. And so it meant a lot to me when I wrote it, and I think it still does. And I'm hoping that there is something that transcends any one particular time as well.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Anna.
I have a question for both of you, actually. This is Jill. Sorry, my camera's off.
Hi,
Hey,
Jill.
Jill.
Hi, guys. So I'm not sure if someone already answered or asked a question like this. I stepped out for a second. But how do you feel that your poetry engages in our current fraught political, socioeconomic climate? Or do you think it doesn't? Or do you think that poetry's place isn't necessarily supposed to be political? I'm curious on your thoughts on that, or if maybe your new work addresses stuff like that.
I can say something since Tyler went first last.
Yeah, go ahead, Brooke.
Sounds like I have it right on the top of my head, and I don't. That is something that I struggle with, and something I try to talk to my students about and talk to them about how all poetry is a political act. And that might sound cliche to some people, or like that's just bullshit or something, but I am of the mindset that poetry and writing just by default is political, and that it can change the way that people think and feel. And I really stand by that. I don't think many people like read anymore, but I think people, I don't know, I mean, that's an assumption, whatever. We don't need to get into that. But I do think just from my experience, that I have been moved and have felt changed by writing, good writing. And I do feel sometimes guilty when my poetry isn't, or my fiction too, isn't overtly political. And when especially when I submit things, like when I was submitting things right when COVID hit, and up until now, I've just been like, this doesn't feel, what I'm submitting isn't overtly addressing what's going on right now, even though that's something that I am thinking about all the time. So it's something I think about and sometimes struggle with, and I'm like, it's a question that I pose to myself, should I be writing something that's more overtly political? And for me, it just hasn't come. My new poetry, new stories haven't taken that route. And for me, I think that's okay. And when I read things that are coming out recently in this political climate that are not overtly political, I think that's okay. But it is something that I think about, and the question of what a writer or any artist's obligation is a big question, and I think a really good question, Jill. So
Yeah.
Excellent.
I would just follow up too with Brooke shared a document with me when I was teaching creative writing class that said that whoever had written it purported that like the goal of writing should be to inform and entertain. And so I think that all writing is political in this idea that writing and reading is a deeply human act, and it opens our eyes to bigger conversations, to other people's lives, and to broader conversation. I think I said that, broader conversations. But my most recent work is really interested in the environmental impact of our Western life. And so that first poem I read, not that anybody has to know this, but like the main, or the subject in that poem, or the character in that poem, I guess the speaker, because it is an I poem, is a like natural gas type worker, and he's been asked to build this fence and like not announce if they find anything that might have cultural or heritage value. And so the speaker with that in that poem is wrestling with that question. And I think that journal that took it, Eco-Theo, right, their interest in theology and ecology, speaks to the nature of poetry, that it can be transcendent, but it also has to be engaged with that present moment. And so that, like Brooke, that is something I'm wrestling with in my own work, and looking for ways to engage in a way that I feel like I am furthering national conversations or regional conversations too.
Yeah. Wonderful.
I have a question. Kind of back to just almost a cliche about process, and I wonder for Brooke or Tyler, as poets, I just wonder, is the process for you just almost like these landscapes and beautiful sceneries, just sort of like it's in your head and you can just jot it down, or how much do you draw really from the landscape that you're actually in, and sort of how does the nature really speak to your poems directly, or is it you just have the talent of poets?
I could jump in first, Brooke, just because these poems in Wyoming are so rooted to landscape. I know that your poems move between the Southwest and Cleveland and some of that, so I'd love to hear your thoughts too. But for me, most of the poems in my collection, Wyoming, did come as I was like out in the country, because I was working on the ranch when the majority of these poems were first drafted. But as I was working on the ranch, I was also saying, hey, I want to write. And so I was looking for ways to prioritize writing. And one of the ways I found, because I couldn't like get myself to set aside time each day to write, was that I would be doing something and I'd see an image, or I'd see like a flower or a pretty landscape, or like something weird would be happening, and I would jot down like 5 lines about it. And so a lot of these poems, the majority of these poems in this book came to be through the act of revision, through expansion. And so a lot of the poems in this book, a lot of the conversational moments in this book started as very short 5 to 10 line things. I don't even know if they would be poems, and I expanded them out and found ways to connect them to each other through theme. I'm definitely, in my newer work, I'm definitely interested in using the page a little bit more to highlight landscape and things like that. So as words move up and down the page, I'm hoping that it kind of evokes the image of mountains, for example, and things like that. And that's something I've maybe learned since I drafted this book, and that's been rewarding for me as well.
Good question, Jay. Yeah, place is important to me too. I think of Tyler as a more sort of like classic sense of place, at least in his, well, no, in your fiction too. But yeah, Cleveland, who, I consider Cleveland and Arizona and New Mexico my home places. Those 3 states are really important to me, and they do come up in my writing. And I think for me it's helpful to, again, this idea of kind of rooting something in a specifics. It's helpful for me to just have a place in mind. I am not very, very concerned with, when I think of sense of place writing, I think of kind of long, sprawling descriptions of place, which is great. I like to kind of include little pieces of that. And, Cleveland for me is sort of this like grungy urban landscape. And I'm interested in that contrast with the Southwest, which for me has been very nature oriented. And I talked about how a lot of my writing feels very coming of age. For me, Cleveland, I had my own coming of age there. That's where I was a teenager. In the Southwest, it was a different coming of age where I sort of came of age as a writer. And so I think those things come up in my poetry and my fiction. But it feels more by default. It feels more from a place of just really loving those places, and that it is helpful just as a tool almost in my mind to root characters or root a poem in a place that I can see. So that's sort of how place operates for me.
Interesting difference. Yeah. Wonderful. Gosh, I think I've heard some of the best questions and answers that we've had so far on Zoom events. So congratulations, everyone. Well, do we have anything more? Or do you want to let these guys, they did such a wonderful job. Thank you so very much, both of you.
Thank you.
Excellent readers, very different, but wonderful readers and wonderful audience. Great questions, great answers. Woo!
Well, that looks like it is. It is. Okay. All right.
I don't know if she's talking to us or you.
No.
I think not.
I would like to have like a crab cocktail.
Okay.
No, no, I'm good. No?
You're on Zoom, whoever that is.
You're on Zoom, everyone.
You're on Zoom. We know about your crab cocktail.
And you're not sharing. Well, I think it's time to end so we can all go have our crab cocktails or whatever. But thank you all for coming and for your readings, your questions, answers, everything. And have a wonderful evening. You've earned it.
Thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Brooke. Thank you, Susan. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.